Some things look like small gestures and turn out to be everything. A pie carried across a field on a Tuesday morning. A wooden porch. A man who had forgotten how to expect good things. A woman who had been bringing good things for 3 years without being asked and without keeping score. Margaret Hale was 25 years old and had lived on the neighboring property her entire life. She knew the Callaway Ranch the way she knew her own hands. The creak of the gate, the particular lean of the old barn, the way the morning light hit the Rocky Mountains to the west and turned everything briefly gold. She knew Thomas Callaway, too. 55 years old, widower over, the kind of man that a hard life makes either bitter or quiet. Thomas had chosen quiet. He worked his land, kept his word, and had spent 3 years learning to live in a house that was too large for one person. She had been bringing him food since Eleanor died. Not out of pity, out of the particular care you give someone you have watched carry something heavy for a long time. On a Tuesday morning in September, she brought him an apple pie. He looked at it, then at her, then he smiled. The rare smile, the one that changed his whole face. "If only I were 10 years younger," he said. He meant it as a joke. She looked at him with an expression he didn't know how to read. Because for Margaret Hale it wasn't a joke at all. Eleanor Callaway had died in the spring of 1880. Not suddenly. The illness had taken its time, the way illnesses do when they want to be thorough. Thomas had sat with her through all of it. And when it was done, he had buried her under the cottonwood, east of the house and gone. Back to work the next morning. Because work was the only thing that made sense. That was what people said about Thomas Callaway afterward, that he went back to work the next morning. Some said it admiringly, some said it with concern. Thomas himself had no opinion about it. He simply didn't know what else to do. Margaret had known Eleanor well. The two families had been neighbors for 30 years. Her parents on the south property, the Callaways on the north, and Eleanor had been the kind of woman who made a neighborhood feel like a community. When Eleanor died, something went quiet that had always been warm. Margaret started bringing food 2 weeks after the funeral. Not every day. She was running her own property, which was 40 acres and required her full attention since her parents had moved to Denver to be near her sister. Just Tuesdays, a pot of something or bread or pie when the apples were good. Thomas always accepted it with the same words. "You didn't have to." Margaret always gave the same answer. "I know." They had this exchange so many times it had become its own kind of conversation, a shorthand for something neither of them examined too closely. What Thomas noticed over 3 years of Tuesdays was that Margaret Hale was extraordinarily capable. She ran the south property alone without complaint and without asking for help. She didn't need. She fixed her own fences. She negotiated her own cattle prices at the market in Durango and got better rates than men twice her experience because she had done her research and knew exactly what things were worth. She was also, he had noticed, and immediately stopped noticing, very easy to be around. The conversation on the porch was always good. She had opinions and offered them without apology. She laughed at things he said that he hadn't been sure were funny. She asked about the cattle and actually listened to the answers. He had categorized all of this carefully, and without examining the categorization too closely under the heading of good neighbor. It was a solid category. It required nothing of him. He intended to keep her there indefinitely, right up until the Tuesday morning. She arrived with the apple pie, and he said the thing he said, and she looked at him the way she looked at him, and the category began quietly and without his permission to fall apart. The town of Durango had opinions about Margaret Hale. This was not surprising. Durango was a growing town in 1883. The railroad had arrived 2 years prior, bringing commerce and newcomers and the particular energy of a place that believes it is becoming something. And growing towns have opinions about everything, especially about young women who run properties alone and don't seem to need saving. The opinion that concerned Margaret most was the one about Daniel Marsh. Daniel was 28 years old, the son of the most prosperous merchant in Durango, handsome in the arranged way of men who have always known they were handsome, and he had been making his interest in Margaret known since the previous spring. Not aggressively. He was too smooth for that. He brought things by. He appeared at the market on the days she was there. He said the right things in the right tone. The town approved of him enthusiastically. He was young. He was prosperous. He would, people agreed, make an excellent husband for Margaret Hale, who was lovely and capable, but was going to wear herself out, running that property, alone if she wasn't careful. Martha Greer at the dry goods store told Margaret directly, "That Marsh is a good man. You could do considerably worse." Margaret thanked her and bought her flour and said nothing else. Her friend Ruth, who was 27 and recently married and therefore an authority on such matters, was more pointed. "He's asked about you 3 times this month." "3 times, Margaret. At what point do you give the man a chance?" "When I want to," Margaret said pleasantly. "And when will that be?" Margaret looked at the mountains to the west. "Those Colorado mountains always there? Always reliable, always exactly themselves?" "I don't know," she said, which was not entirely true. She had a fairly clear sense of when she wanted to give Daniel Marsh a chance, and the answer was approximately never. And the reason for that answer was something she was not yet ready to say out loud. Would make it real, and real things had consequences. She had made the pie on a Monday evening. Good apples from the tree at the south end of her property, the ones that came in sweet in September. She made the crust the way her mother had taught her. Cold butter, cold hands, don't overwork it. She crimped the edges carefully. She would later admit to herself, being more careful than the occasion strictly required. She carried it across the field on Tuesday morning under a sky that was doing what Colorado skies do in September. An improbable blue, the kind that makes everything below it look like a painting. Thomas was on the porch when she arrived. He usually was on Tuesday mornings, as if he had learned the rhythm of her visits without acknowledging that he had. He was drinking coffee and looking at the mountains with the particular stillness of a man who has made peace with mornings. She came up the porch steps and held out the pie. He looked at it with genuine appreciation. Thomas Calloway was a man who understood the value of a well-made pie, which Margaret had always considered a point in his favor. "Apple," he said. "September apples," she said. "The good ones." He looked at the pie, then at her, and then he smiled. The rare smile, the one that arrived slowly and changed his whole face, the one that made him look like a younger version of himself. And he said, "If only I were 10 years younger." He said it lightly, the way you say things that are meant to land gently and move on. Margaret looked at him. The Colorado morning held them both. A hawk turned overhead. The mountains did what they always did. 10 years wouldn't be enough, she said. And then before he could parse that, she set the pie on the porch railing and said she had cattle to check, and went back across the field. Thomas stood on his porch and looked at the pie and then at her retreating figure and then at the pie again. He stood there for quite a long time. Then he went inside and poured himself more coffee and sat at the kitchen table and thought about what she had said. He thought about it for the rest of the day. He thought about it, if he was honest, for considerably longer than that. Daniel Marsh arrived at Margaret's property on a Wednesday with flowers. Not wildflowers, arranged flowers, the kind that come from a shop, which meant he had ordered them from Denver, which meant he had planned this. Margaret received them with the warmth she gave everything, and the specific internal reaction of a woman who knows exactly what flowers from Denver mean, and is not sure how to address it without being unkind. She put them in water. She offered coffee. Daniel sat at her kitchen table, with the ease of a man who was accustomed to being welcome, and told her about his father's new supply contract with the railroad, which was substantial, and which he described with the modest pride of someone who wants you to know something without appearing to want you to know it.